One ruler called an entire people slaves. "How dare a forged slave ask for the hand of my daughter?" That one insult cost him everything: his empire, his throne, and his life. Because these slaves were the ones who made the weapons. And one day, they looked at the blades in their hands and understood who those blades were really for. That is how a people were born who called themselves Turk.
In part 0, the Jongno walked the steppe. Now that steppe is about to give birth to my people, the Turks. And it starts with slaves, a wolf, and one deadly insult.
Centuries after the Xiongnu vanished, the great steppe had a new master, a people called the Rouran. They ruled the grasslands from Mongolia to the edge of Central Asia. Their leader carried a proud title, Khagan, Khan of Khans, King of Kings. It's a word you'll hear again and again in this saga, and it was born here, on the steppe. The Rouran were strong, they were feared, and like every steppe power, they had peoples beneath them, tribes that served, that paid, that obeyed. And at the very bottom of that order was one small clan, a clan the Rouran barely thought of as human. They lived where the mountains meet the steppe, and they had one job: to dig iron out of the mountain and forge it into weapons for their masters. The Rouran had a name for them, a mocking name: the Forge Slaves. That clan called itself Ashina. The Rouran saw blacksmiths, servants, tools. What they did not see was an empire waiting to be born. Where did this clan come from? The Turks themselves told a story, a legend, and it is one of the most haunting origin myths in all of history. Long ago, they said, an enemy fell upon their people and slaughtered them, every man, woman, and child. All but one, a single boy, left for dead, his limbs cut, bleeding out on the grass. He should have died there, but something found him, a she-wolf. She did not kill him, she sheltered him, fed him, kept him alive in the mountains, hidden from the enemies who wanted the bloodline erased. And when the boy grew, from him and the wolf came a new people. From that she-wolf, whose name echoes in the word Ashina, the clan was born. That is why the wolf became sacred to the Turks, why their banner would one day carry a golden wolf's head. They believed it in their bones. We are the children of the wolf. We were meant to be wiped out, and we survived anyway. Is the legend literally true? Of course not. But legends tell you how a people saw themselves, and the Ashina saw themselves as survivors, born from a massacre, raised by a predator, impossible to kill. Remember that, because their masters were about to learn what it means to corner an animal that refuses to die.
A people born from a wolf, who believe they can't be destroyed. Now let me show you how the slaves actually lived, because it explains everything.
Every tribe on the steppe had horses. Every tribe had bows, but the Ashina had something no one else did. They had fire. Deep in the Altai, they cut ore out of the mountain and dragged it down to the forges. Men worked half-blind in smoke and heat, pumping bellows made of hide until the coals ran white. Then came the hammer, hour after hour, day after day, folding, beating, shaping the metal until it held an edge. This was brutal work. Burns that never healed, lungs full of soot, hands that turned to leather before a man reached 30, and every blade that came off that anvil went straight to the men who owned them. Their masters saw filth, sweat, the lowest work a person could do. What they never once considered was the arithmetic of it. An entire clan that knew iron better than anyone alive and knew exactly how many swords the empire had because they had made every single one. And when these men stepped out of the smoke, they looked up at the one thing that ruled their world, the sky. Not a god carved in stone, not a temple with walls. The raw, open sky above the Altai. It sent the rain that kept the herds alive and the killing frost that took them. They called it Tengri, the eternal blue sky, and they believed it favored the bold. Now, here is a thread worth pulling. This sky worship, under this very name, did not start with the Turks. The Xiongnu, the people we followed in Part 0, bowed to the same sky centuries earlier and called it by a name that echoes as Tengri. That shared god is one of the reasons some scholars believe the Xiongnu were the forefathers of the Turks. Can anyone prove it? No. The steppe left almost no writing behind. Only the sky knows the truth of it. But it was the same sky. It watched the Xiongnu rise and vanish, and now it was watching a clan of blacksmiths who were about to be pushed one step too far. Into this world came a leader, the chief of the Ashina. His name was Bumin. Bumin was no fool. He led the forge clans, yes, but he watched. He saw the Rouran growing lazy and arrogant on top of the steppe. He saw other tribes beginning to resent them, and he saw something his masters could not, that the clan of blacksmiths had quietly become strong. Bumin's first move was patient, the move of a man who plays a long game. When a rebel people rose against the Rouran, Bumin did not join the rebels. He crushed them for his masters. He handed the Rouran a victory. He proved his strength and his loyalty in a single stroke, and then he asked for the reward he believed he had earned. He asked the Rouran Khagan for a royal bride, a princess, not out of love. In the steppe, a marriage to the ruling house meant one thing: you are no longer slaves, you are equals. And the Rouran Khagan's answer was the spark that lit everything. He refused, and by legend, he did it with contempt that would echo for centuries. How dare a forge slave ask for the hand of my daughter? Think about what that answer really said. It said, no matter what you do, no matter how strong you become, you will always be slaves to us. It told Bumin that loyalty would never buy his people their freedom. So Bumin stopped asking, and he remembered the blades, the mountains of weapons his people had forged for their masters with their own hands. The masters had armed the very slaves who would destroy them.
One insult, that's all it took. And the people who made every weapon on the steppe decided who those weapons were really for.
In the year 552, Bumin struck. He turned on the Rouran with the fury of a people who had swallowed insults for generations. And crucially, he was not alone. He made an alliance, turned the Rouran's own rivals against them, and hit the masters from every side at once. The Rouran, who had ruled the steppe with contempt, were caught in the storm they never saw coming. Their own forge workers, the ones who made their swords, now drove those same swords into the heart of their empire. The Rouran Khagan, the man who had sneered, "How dare a forge worker ask for my daughter?" was shattered. By legend, defeated and disgraced, he met his end rather than fall into the hands of the men he had mocked. The masters were broken. The forge clans stood over the ruins of the people who had owned them. And in that moment, Bumin did something no leader of his people had ever done. He took a title that had belonged to their masters. He declared himself Khagan. The clan, once called Forge Workers, now had an empire, and they gave that empire a name, their own name, a word that had never before ruled the steppe: Turk. The First Turkic Khaganate was born. For the very first time in history, a people stood up and said to the world, "We are the Turks." Bumin had done the impossible. The children of the wolf, born from ruin, raised in bondage, mocked by kings, were now the masters of the steppe. But Bumin's triumph came with a shadow. He had built something enormous, almost overnight, an empire that already stretched across the steppe, and one man could not rule all of it alone. Bumin took the eastern half of the new empire, the heartland, the throne, but the west, the vast steppe roads reaching towards Central Asia and beyond, he trusted to the one man he could rely on completely, his own brother, Istemi. It was a decision that made the Turks unstoppable in that first generation. Two brothers, two halves, one people, driving outward in every direction. But it planted a seed, because an empire split between an eastern throne and a western throne is an empire with two centers of power. For now, held together by blood and loyalty. But blood thins with each generation, and thrones have a way of turning brothers' sons against each other. Bumin himself would not rule long. He died soon after his great victory, at the very peak of his triumph. But he had done the one thing that mattered. He had given his people a name, a throne, and a place in history that could never be erased. The forge slaves were gone forever. In their place stood the Turks, and their story was only beginning. To the west, Bumin's brother Istemi was already riding toward the Silk Road, toward Persia, toward the walls of a distant empire called Byzantium, about to make the Turks a power that kings on the other side of the world would fear. Istemi rides west, and that is where this saga goes next.
Slaves became kings. A wolf clan named the whole people Turk. In the next part, Bumin's brother takes the Silk Road and shocks the Roman world. Subscribe and follow the rise from the very beginning.